It was a quiet evening. The sun was going down, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. Birds were flying back to their homes, and a gentle wind moved the trees. Everything felt peaceful, but I did not know that tonight would change someone's life forever. I had just finished my work and was walking home. The streets were not too busy. Some people were laughing with their friends, some were rushing home, and some were sitting alone, lost in their thoughts. I liked watching people, made me feel connected to the world in a strange way. But tonight, something different was waiting for me. As I walked past a small shop, I heard a noise behind me. It was a soft sound, like footsteps trying to be quiet. My heart beat a little faster. I turned my head slightly and saw a man following me. He wore an old hoodie, and his face was half covered. His eyes looked sharp, like a person who had seen too much pain. I understood immediately, he was a thief. For a moment, fear tried to take control of me. But then, I took a deep breath. I remembered something my grandmother always said. Every person has a story. Before you judge them, try to understand them. Maybe this man was not just a thief. Maybe life had pushed him to this. I kept walking, pretending not to notice. But my heart was racing. What should I do? Run? Call for help? Or try something different? Suddenly, I felt a hand grab my bag. The man pulled hard, trying to take it away from me. My first reaction was to fight back. But then I looked into his eyes, and what I saw surprised me. He was not just angry or dangerous. He was scared. His eyes were full of sadness, like a man who had lost everything. He was desperate. I did something he did not expect. Instead of screaming or fighting, I held onto my bag and softly said, "Are you okay?" He froze. His grip on my bag loosened a little. He looked at me, confused. "What?" he said, his voice rough. "Are you okay?" I repeated. "You look like you're in pain." He let go of my bag completely. His hands shook slightly. He took a step back, like he didn't know what to do. Why are you asking me that?" he mumbled. "Because I can see it in your eyes," I said. "You're not a bad person. You're just in a bad place." For a few seconds, there was silence. The streetlights flickered above us. The world felt smaller, like it was just me and him standing there. Then, something unbelievable happened. He sat down on the pavement. Just like that. He put his hands over his face, and then, he started crying. Not loud, not like in the movies, but soft, broken sobs that made my heart ache. I sat down beside him. I didn't say anything. I just waited. After a few moments, he spoke. I don't want to do this," he whispered. "But I have no choice. I lost my job. My family left me. I haven't eaten for 2 days. I don't know what to do anymore." His words hit me like a wave. I felt my own eyes becoming wet. Life had been cruel to him. And now, he was at a point where he thought stealing was his only option. I reached into my bag, took out the sandwich I had packed earlier, and handed it to him. He looked at it like it was gold. "Here," I said softly. "Eat." He hesitated, but then he took it. He ate like he had never seen food before. Each bite was slow, like he wanted to make it last. After he finished, I asked, "If you could have one chance to change your life, would you take it?" He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something new in his eyes. Hope, yes, he said. I would, I smiled. Then let's start now. That night, I took him to a shelter where he could sleep. The next day, I helped him find a small job. It wasn't much, just cleaning tables at a cafe, but it was a start. Days passed, then weeks. Every time I saw him, he looked stronger, brighter. One day, he came to me with a big smile. I got a real job, he said, his eyes shining. In a store. They're trusting me with money. I laughed. That's amazing. And then, he did something that made my heart full. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of bread. It's not much, he said, but it's my first salary. I wanted to buy you something, to say thank you. I took the bread with tears in my eyes. You don't owe me anything, I said. Just promise me one thing. What? He asked. One day, when you see someone who needs help, be their hope. He nodded. And in that moment, I knew his life had changed forever. We all have the power to change someone's story. Sometimes, all they need is kindness. Months passed, and life moved forward. But something inside me had changed that night. I kept thinking how many people in the world were like him. How many were standing on the edge, ready to fall, just waiting for someone to reach out a hand. One evening, as I walked past the same street where I had met him, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There he was. But he was not alone. He was sitting on the pavement, talking to a young boy, maybe 16 or 17, whose clothes were torn, whose face was tired, and whose eyes looked just like his had that night. Full of pain, I watched from a distance. The boy tried to act tough, but I could see his hands shaking. And then, just like I had done for him, the man reached into his bag and handed the boy some food. My heart swelled with emotion. It was happening. The kindness I had given him had not stopped with him. He was passing it forward. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. One act of kindness never stays in one place. It moves. It grows. It becomes a chain, changing one life after another. I walked up to him, smiling. I see you took my promise seriously, I said. He looked up and grinned. How could I not? He turned to the boy beside him. This is the person who changed my life. The boy looked at me, confused. How? He asked. I crouched down beside him. By believing in him when no one else did. The boy's eyes softened. And right then, I knew another life was about to change. We live in a world where it's easy to walk past people, to ignore their struggles, to think, it's not my problem. But what if, just once, we stopped? What if we listened? What if we believed in someone when no one else did? Maybe, just maybe, we could change a life. And that life could change another. And another. Until, one day, the world is not full of thieves and broken hearts, but of kindness, hope, and second chances. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Let's keep this chain of kindness going. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one person, to make all the difference. Days turned into weeks, and the chain of kindness kept growing. The boy, who had once sat on the cold pavement with empty hands and tired eyes, now had hope. With the help of the man whose life I had once changed, he found shelter, food, and a small job sweeping floors at a bakery. One day, I visited them at the cafe, where the man still worked. The boy was there too, helping clean tables. They both looked different, now stronger, happier. Life had returned to their eyes. As I sat down, the man smiled and brought me a cup of tea. "On the house," he said with a wink. I laughed. "Wow, free tea. I must be special." He sat down across from me. "No," he said seriously. "You're not just special. You're the reason I'm here." "The reason he's here," he added, nodding toward the boy. The boy smiled shyly. "I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't met him," he admitted. "Maybe I would have stolen. Maybe I would have ended up in a worse place." I felt a lump in my throat. "But you didn't," I said. "Because someone saw you. Someone believed in you." The boy nodded. "And now, I want to do the same for others." A warmth spread through my chest. It was happening again. The kindness was growing, passing from one person to another like a ripple in a pond. That evening, as I walked home, I thought about how different things could have been. What if, that night, I had screamed, fought back, called the police? The man's life could have been destroyed. The boy might never have found help. And that beautiful moment at the cafe would have never happened. One small choice had changed everything. And then, a thought came to me: how many lives could be changed if more people made that choice? How many people were out there, standing on the edge, waiting for someone to reach out? As I looked up at the sky, filled with soft stars and the glow of the city lights, I made a silent promise. Whenever I could, I would be that person. I would be the hand that reached out. The voice that asked, "Are you okay?" Because sometimes, that's all it takes. A moment of kindness. A moment of love. A moment that could change a life forever. The days kept passing, but the story never really ended. Because kindness, once planted, never stops growing. A few months later, I received a call from the man I had helped. His voice was full of excitement. "You won't believe this," he said, breathless. "I got a promotion. I'm going to be a manager." I smiled so wide that my cheeks hurt. "That's amazing, and guess what?" he continued. "I recommended the boy for a better job too. He'll be working as a cashier now, earning more money." Hearing that made my heart swell with pride. "You're changing lives now," I said softly. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I learned it from you." His words stayed with me long after we ended the call. I realized something important. When you help one person, you're not just changing their life. You're creating a ripple effect. That boy would help someone else one day. And that person would help another. And maybe, just maybe, the world would become a little softer, a little kinder, because of one small choice to believe in someone when no one else did. I met them both again a few weeks later. This time, they weren't just two people trying to survive. They were two people thriving. The man looked confident, wearing a neat uniform. The boy had cut his hair and stood tall, smiling. They had become the kind of people others could look up to. As we sat together at the cafe, the boy suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" I nodded. "All the time." He looked down at his hands. "I think about that night a lot. If you hadn't stopped him, if you had screamed or called the police, I wouldn't be here. I would have gone down the wrong path." I took a deep breath. But that's the thing about life, I said. It only takes one moment to change everything. One moment of kindness. One moment of understanding. He smiled. I want to be that moment for someone else one day. And right then, I knew, this was bigger than just us. This was a movement. This was proof that love, kindness, and second chances could turn even the darkest nights into mornings full of light. As I walked home that evening, I felt something. Deep inside me, a sense of peace. Because I knew, somewhere out there, someone was struggling. Someone felt alone. Someone needed hope. And maybe, just maybe, they would meet a person who would look them in the eyes and say, "Are you okay?" And in that moment, their whole world would change. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's keep spreading kindness, one story at a time. Because you never know whose life you might change next. Life went on, and with each passing day, I felt more deeply the truth of what had happened. One choice, one moment of kindness, had created a wave of change that kept moving forward. But life has a way of surprising us, of showing us that the story is never really over. One evening, while walking down a different street, I saw a familiar face. It was the boy only. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He had grown into a young man, and beside him was someone new. A girl, no older than 14, with torn clothes and tired eyes, much like he had once looked. I watched as he sat beside her on a bench, offering her food, speaking softly, just as I had once spoken to him. My heart swelled. The chain of kindness was still growing. I walked over, and as soon as he saw me, his face lit up. "I was hoping to see you again," he said. I smiled. "And who is this?" I asked, looking at the girl. She looked at me with nervous eyes, as if unsure whether to trust me. "Her name is Mia," he said. "She ran away from home. She's been living on the streets for days." I knelt down beside her. "Mia," I said gently, "whatever happened, you're not alone anymore." She hesitated, her small hands gripping the edge of her jacket. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled softly. "Because someone once cared for me," I said, nodding toward the young man. "And someone once cared for him. And now, we want to care for you." Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hold them back, but one slipped down her cheek. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "You don't have to figure it out alone," he said. "We'll help you." And just like that, the chain continued. That night, Mia had a warm meal. She had a safe place to sleep. She had hope. And I realized something truly powerful. Kindness does not have an ending. It keeps passing from one person to another, growing, spreading, changing lives. One act, one person, one moment. That's all it takes. As I watched the young man guide Mia toward a better future, I felt tears in my own eyes. I had started something, but I was no longer the one carrying it forward. It had become bigger than me, and maybe, somewhere in the world, this story was happening again, with someone else. Maybe a stranger was choosing to listen instead of turning away. Maybe someone was choosing kindness over fear. Maybe, right now, another life was changing, just because one person believed in them. And maybe, this is how we change the world. Not all at once, not in big, grand ways, but one heart at a time. The story never really ended, because kindness does not stop. It lives in the choices we make, in the hearts we touch, and in the love we share. Mia, the girl we had found that night, slowly began to trust us. At first, she barely spoke. She was used to being ignored, to feeling invisible, to believing that no one truly cared. But time, patience, and kindness have a way of healing wounds that no one else can see. The young man who had once been a thief became her protector. He checked on her every day, made sure she ate, and helped her find a small part-time job at a flower shop. The transformation was incredible. The boy who once had nothing, now had something to give. One evening, we all met again at the same cafe, where the journey had started. The air was cool, the streetlights flickered softly, and the world felt peaceful. Mia sat across from me, stirring her tea. "You know," she said hesitantly, "I used to think the world was cruel, that people only cared about themselves, that no one would ever help someone like me." I watched her carefully. "And what do you think now?" She looked up, her eyes shining. "I think I was wrong." A warmth spread through my chest. "I'm glad you see that now," I said. "Because the truth is, there are good people in the world. Sometimes, they're just hard to find. But once you do, everything changes." She took a deep breath. "I want to be one of those people," she said. "One day, when I can, I want to help someone the way you helped me." I glanced at the young man beside her. He was smiling, proud, hopeful. The chain of kindness was growing again. That night, as I walked home, I felt something powerful settle deep in my heart. We live in a world that often feels cold, where people pass each other by without a second thought. But I had seen with my own eyes how one act of kindness could change everything. It was like planting a seed. At first, it was small, almost invisible. But with love, it grew. And now, the kindness I had once given to one man had touched the life of a boy. And that boy had touched the life of a girl. And one day, she would help someone else. And that person would help another. And the chain would never stop. I paused under the streetlights, looking up at the endless sky. The stars twinkled above me, whispering a truth that I had learned through this journey. We all have the power to change the world. Not by being rich, not by being famous, but simply by choosing kindness, by stopping when others walk away, by seeing the invisible, by believing in the ones who have stopped believing in themselves. Because, in the end, the world doesn't change with big speeches or grand gestures. It changes with love. One heart at a time. If this story touched you. Months passed, and life continued its quiet journey forward. But something had shifted, not just in me, but in all of us. The man who had once been a thief was no longer just surviving, he was thriving. He had grown into a person others looked up to, someone people trusted. He was no longer a shadow in the night, stealing to stay alive. Now, he was a guiding light for others who had lost their way. The boy, who had once been lost and hopeless, had transformed into a young man, with dreams. He had saved up enough money to rent a small room. He was learning new skills, planning for a future he never thought he would have. And Mia, the girl who had thought the world was cruel, now carried hope in her heart. She had started school again, working part-time at the flower shop in the evenings. She told me once that she loved watching flowers bloom. "It reminds me of people," she said softly. "How we start small, sometimes weak, but with care, we grow into something beautiful. I smiled at her words because I knew they were true. One evening, as we all sat together at the cafe, Mia suddenly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said shyly. "I don't know if it's good, but I wanted to share it with you." We all leaned in, as she slowly unfolded the paper. She took a deep breath and read aloud. "To the world that once felt too big, too lonely, too cruel, I thought I had no place in you. But then, someone saw me. Someone chose to stop when they could have walked away. And because of that, I am here. I am growing. And one day, I will do the same for someone else. Because kindness is a seed, and when planted, it never stops growing." Silence filled the air. And then, the man, the one who had once been a thief, out and gently placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. His eyes were wet, filled with emotions he didn't try to hide. "You already are," he said. "You're already changing the world, Mia." Her lips trembled, and for a moment, she looked as if she might cry. But then, she smiled a soft, real smile that carried all the pain of her past and all the hope of her future. And in that moment, I realized something. This was never just about one thief, or one boy, or one girl. This was about all of us. Every single person who had ever felt lost. Every person who had ever needed a second chance. Every heart that had ever needed someone to say, "I believe in you." And now, that belief was alive in all of us. The chain of kindness had not only grown, it had become unbreakable. As I walked home that night, I felt something I couldn't quite put into words. A warmth, a quiet joy, a deep peace that told me this was just the beginning. Because somewhere, out there, in the same city, on another cold night, someone else was waiting, waiting for kindness, waiting for hope, waiting for someone to look them in the eyes and say, "Are you okay?" And when that moment came, I knew this story would continue. Not just through me, but through every person who had been touched by kindness. Through you. Through all of us. Because kindness, once given, never truly ends. It just keeps going, changing lives, one heart at a time. If this story touched you, if it made you believe in the power of kindness, please like and subscribe. Not for me, but for the message. Let's make kindness louder. Let's keep the chain going. Because you never know whose life you might change next.